Hello and welcome to AGTP Daily, where we cover the most significant and important tech stories in the United States and abroad. Today is Monday, the 16th of March, 2026. Let's get right to it. I want to cover two important stories today. Facebook's AI contradiction, huge potential layoffs amid a massive increase in AI-related spending, and Sweden's Legora raises $550 million at a $5.5 billion valuation. There are stories circulating about huge potential layoffs amid a massive increase in AI-related spending at Meta, at Facebook. Call it whatever you want. I'm sure they're still regretting changing their name. What does it mean? Let's think about this. When one of the richest, most important and powerful technology companies in the world is spending aggressively on AI, delaying its flagship model, and at the same time, reportedly considering layoffs on a very large scale. Because that's the story right now at Facebook and Meta. According to Reuters, Meta is discussing layoffs that could affect 20% of its or more of its workforce. No final decision has been made on this yet. Reuters reports that the company employed approximately 79,000 people at the end of 2025, which means that if the cuts came at that level, this would be Meta's biggest restructuring since the year of efficiency that saw 11,000 jobs get cut in late 2022 and another 10,000 in early 2023. And that in and of itself would be a gigantic story. But it becomes much bigger when placed next to the second Reuters report that Meta has also pushed back the release of its new AI model, codenamed Avocado. Well, I guess if they're not taking it that seriously, then maybe we shouldn't take it that seriously either. Avocado for an AI model. They're pushing back this release until May or even later than that after serious performance concerns. Reuters says the model's current performance sits somewhere between Google's Gemini 2.5 and Gemini's 3, and that it's not yet matched the standard that Meta appears to need for launch. And you have to think about this. When you think about Meta and think about Facebook, where does their expertise lie? Where does it lie? When you think about them, do you think about them as an AI company, or do you think about them as a social network? I mean, your entire life, your entire existence, if you're even still participating in Facebook, has been Facebook as a social network, a way to join communities, create communities, and share things with your friends and family. And that's really it, right? So the story here is no longer simply that Meta is spending heavily on artificial intelligence. The real question to me here is that it may be reorganizing its workforce around an AI future that's not fully arrived yet. And that's why this matters. It matters for a bunch of reasons like this, right? And not the least of which is, what are their own internal expectations about what their core competencies are? What are they? When they look around, when they walk around the office, when they talk to their remote workforce and they say, is our expertise in artificial intelligence? Or do we just think that this is the next big thing? I'm starting to get the impression, right? Because Meta changed their name, right? What was it, a few years ago? Because they thought the metaverse was going to be this big thing. It never materialized. And to be fair, I don't think that's going to materialize. But their expertise was in trying to connect people inside the metaverse as opposed to trying to connect people in the real or just in the digital world. But now they're playing a different game. Now they're playing a very different game because they were just trying to take some new technology and apply it to the thing that they'd always done. And that was this connectivity thing, this making community thing. They were just trying to do it in a more sort of three-dimensional metaverse style way, but nobody cared. Okay, so they have the glasses that they're working on as well with Ray-Ban. But again, where is their core competency? Just think about this in that context. For the past year and a half, the stock market has rewarded a very, very simple narrative. Big tech was just going to spend enormous amounts of money on AI infrastructure, build larger and more capable, smarter, faster systems, and then convert that technical advantage into stronger products, stronger margins, and stronger control over the next era of computing. The only problem here is that Meta has completely embraced that logic more aggressively than almost anyone. And I think part of the reason why is they have dedicated so much of their capital expenditure to artificial intelligence in a way that smells different to me than what OpenAI is doing and what Anthropic is doing. And part of the reason why is because, and Perplexity as well, but let's just talk about OpenAI and Anthropic. These are AI native companies built by people whose only reason for getting up in the morning from the moment they started that company until the time they go to sleep at night is to talk about artificial intelligence and to build an artificial intelligence infrastructure. Gigantic business. NVIDIA the same way. This is why, and Amazon too. This is why they're making such large investments into artificial intelligence, okay? But let's look at Meta for a second. In its official fourth quarter and full year 2025 results, the company said that it expects 2026 capex, or capital expenditure, of $115 to $135 billion. It also said full year 2026 expenses would rise to 162 to 169 billion, with most of that increase driven by infrastructure costs, including third-party cloud spend, which is interesting in and of itself, depreciation and operating expenditures tied to infrastructure. Employee compensation will be the second largest contributor, driven largely by AI hiring. Let's just think about this. That third-party cloud thing is actually really important to me because Facebook has spent a lot of time in the past building their own data centers, right? Designing their own servers, running their own software on this. So just the fact that they're spending on third-party cloud means they're just spending a ton of money, just a ton of money. Reuters described this in January, and I remember reading this actually as a 73% jump in Meta's planned capital spending, tied directly to Zuckerberg's push toward what he called superintelligence. Mark Zuckerberg also said that this would be a major year, not just for AI products, but for shaping how the company itself will work going forward. And that phrase really, really matters. How the company will work going forward. Because the stories and the rumors or the discussions around these layoffs suggest that AI is not just a product investment inside Meta. It's also becoming an organizational investment. How are they logically going to organize themselves internally, and what's going to be the impact on artificial intelligence and their ability to use artificial intelligence internally, just internally, not even for external product creation, not for products that you and I may or may not use, but how it's going to help them reorganize the way they work internally. They're spending a ton of time thinking about this. Okay, Reuters reported that senior executives have kind of signaled plans to other leaders and told them to begin thinking about how to cut back. And the reason for this, according to Reuters, is twofold. They want to offset the cost of Meta's AI infrastructure bets and prepare for the greater efficiency that AI-assisted workers are expected to bring. Reuters also quoted Zuck saying that in January that he's starting to see projects that once required huge teams are now being accomplished by a single very talented person. I spent a ton of time talking about this, and this is a real shift, actually. In the old days, we used to say, like, if you had just one superstar programmer and then a team of 4 or 5 other sort of mid or okay programmers working with them, you could create some really great projects. You could build some really good products. But now, right, and that superstar programmer also had to have some management responsibility and some management capabilities because they were essentially responsible for managing that team of 5 people, okay? But now what do you have? Well, now you have the ability through Opus 4.6 and Anthropic to be able to hire 5 sort of agentic programmers, right? And there's this concept that every agent is a developer. I may do an entire episode on this, actually, but just think about that. This is internally, right, at Facebook. This is not an idea of we're just spending a ton of money on AI. It's super expensive, so we have to cut all these people. It's that AI is expensive. Therefore, companies are going to try to figure out how to redesign themselves organizationally, right? So fewer people are needed to produce the same output. And once you say that out loud, the whole labor story in tech changes. I did a really great episode yesterday for ATP Insights, where we spoke to somebody about the impact that AI is going to have on organizational behavior. And one of the things that this guy said to me, and you should listen to this episode or watch this episode as well, is that employees inside companies, he believes very strongly that humans are not going to go away. Okay, and we'll talk about this in the context of Meta in a second. He believes this very strongly, but just that the kind of work that they're going to do is going to be very different. Somebody has to, like, the key thing that he said to me, and I thought this was really important, was why is there all this discussion about autonomous agents, fully autonomous agents? He said this is a complete misnomer. And part of the reason why is, even if you hire a human employee, are they fully autonomous? They can just randomly go off and do whatever they want? That's not true at all. They're managed, somebody's paying attention to them, somebody's supervising them, somebody's approving the work that they do. And just from a governance and purely like how are we going to run our AI infrastructure standpoint, The same thing is probably going to happen with agentic AI. They're not just going to be able to randomly go out and do stuff 100% autonomously. Maybe it's 75%, maybe it's 80%. But this superstar programmer, in the context that we're discussing today, means that that programmer is going to have to understand how his team of Opus 4.6 developers, or whichever system he's using to do this automated development stuff, he's going to have to be able to manage them, or she's going to have to able to manage them in a way it's just going to be different, right? But someone's going to have to overlook and oversee what they're doing. Those agents are not just going to be 100% autonomous. And for years, tech layoffs were essentially explained by overhiring. Sorry, we just put too many people in here. Even rising interest rates, which we're not in a rising interest rate environment right now, or even post-pandemic correction. We hired way too many people during the pandemic kind of thing, and now we just have to pare it back. But what makes the Meta story so interesting is that it's not reframing layoffs as some kind of feature of macroeconomic events. It reframes them as a feature of AI adoption rather than a side effect of these macroeconomic or potential macroeconomic conditions. The idea that internally is we don't think we're going to need as many people as we have to be able to be as productive as we are now. So in other words, just to put it simply, the argument right now is no longer business got weak, so we cut jobs. The new theory here is that AI tools are getting better. So the company of the future should have fewer humans in certain parts of the stack. I'll give you that, actually. But we have to ask ourselves if this is really true, right? Just remember the episode that we did yesterday, actually, on ATP Insights with a guy named Dan Turnus. Just go watch it. It was super interesting from a bunch of different perspectives, but in this perspective in particular. Reuters explicitly connects Meta's discussions to a broader pattern in the overall U.S. business, noting that executives across major companies have pointed to improvements in AI systems as a reason they can do more with smaller teams. This is definitely possible. I know for a fact in my own company, we are doing way more with fewer people. We've actually had people leave, and we've just replaced them with some automated stuff that we built ourselves, right? So I completely understand this. We definitely have smaller teams now. And Reuters cited Amazon's January cuts and blocks sharper reductions as part of this broader trend. We addressed those things when they were happening at the end of January and beginning of February. This is not an isolated case for Meta, but it's one of the most interesting ones because Meta is trying to basically occupy both sides of the AI economy at once, right? Block is not trying to become an AI company, an AI native company. Amazon is at some level, but their business is so big and so complex that it's not a one-for-one comparison. Okay, Facebook wants to be a seller of picks and shovels in the sense that it's building foundational models, or trying to. It's also building and designing chips, or trying to. Infrastructure, open model ecosystems, and they want to build AI-powered advertising and product systems. And I would have to say that that's probably going to be their most successful foray here because that's their business. Advertising. Look at where they get most of their revenue from. Look at where they get the bulk of their revenue from. It's almost all advertising. So the real question here for me is, how are they going to apply artificial intelligence internally in a way that's sensible? And we see this a lot, right? Companies will lay off 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 people and then slowly but surely start hiring back people because they have all these things that they need people to supervise, to overlook, that they did not consider when they did these mass layoffs. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the same thing happened at Facebook, if in fact they do go through with these layoffs. Right now, these are just stories that we're hearing, right? It also continues to look, or increasingly looks like, a company that maybe they're just using it as a justification for restructuring. Maybe they wanted to do this anyway, right? And they're just like, there's gambling going on in here kind of thing, if anybody's ever seen that movie. But this sends a different kind of signal to the market. It says that the artificial intelligence boom does not just create winners. It also changes the internal social contract of the firms that are supposed to benefit the most from it. And there's also, now we come to a second contradiction. Because even as Meta spends at a staggering, you remember those hundreds of billions of dollars we talked about at the beginning of this segment, scale, it's not so obvious that execution is matching ambition. Again, let's get back to this. What is Meta's core competency? When have they been great at building new, sophisticated, complex software products that didn't dovetail nicely with their existing social network? When? Reuters reports that the avocado model, and again, seriously, like how seriously do you take yourself if you're naming your model avocado? You may as well have named it tangerine. Has been delayed until at least May. And I love when they like put a final date or release date on a piece of software that's so complex and potentially so sophisticated that like, yeah, we just need like 2 more months to do that. I'm just going to make a bet right now that says that if they're delaying this until May, they're delaying it until September. Just my opinion based on all the software stuff that I've seen developed. The company is still projecting confidence, with a spokesperson reiterating Zuck's earnings call message that the next model will show the rapid trajectory that Meta is on, and that the frontier will keep being pushed over the course of the year. But this delay matters for a bunch of different reasons, right? One, because capital markets can tolerate high spending if they believe the output is on schedule. And remember, most of management's compensation is tied to stock price. It has been for almost 2 decades now. And that's why this matters there, right? Employees themselves can also tolerate internal pressure if they believe that the company's strategy is coherent. Are we running in the right direction? Does anybody even feel like we're running in the right direction? Like, why are we even building all these AI products? I'm sure these conversations are going on internally at Meta. And developers can tolerate ecosystem instability if they believe that the platform leader is still leading. But if a company is spending at enormous scale, and we've already discussed that Facebook is, hinting at AI-driven labor compression, so we're going to lay people off, and simultaneously pushing back a flagship model because performance is not where it needs to be, how do they even know, right? Then the conversation changes from ambition to execution risk. And I think this is where Meta is now. Can we really pull this off? Do we have the internal chops to pull off a product that is so unrelated to almost everything that not that we do, but that we've ever done, right? How's that going to work? And it's particularly important because the competitive field for Meta has become much more difficult. They have no competition, obviously, in the social media market. I mean, they do, but it's different. You don't do on Twitter what you do on Facebook, if you're even on Facebook anymore. And I think this is different across the globe. I think Facebook usage in the United States is very different than Facebook usage in Indonesia and in the Philippines. That's a story for another time. But I think if you ask people in general in the United States, like how much time they're spending on Facebook in a way that they did 15 years ago, they would tell you that it's completely different, right? And in the artificial intelligence space, I mean, Facebook is starting like way behind the start line. And everybody else with whom they're going to be competing that are building foundational frontier models have a really, really, like, I don't know, 5-year lead on them. I don't even know what number you'd put on it. But do you think Anthropic has better chops to build artificial intelligence frontier style models, or OpenAI, or Facebook? Reuters says Avocado's current performance falls between Gemini 2.5 and Gemini 3. It also says that Meta leaders have discussed the possibility of temporarily licensing Google's Gemini technology to power some AI products, though no decision has been made. But just think about this for a sec, right? So we talked about this in the context of Apple last week more than once. We even did a whole segment on is the brain behind Apple's artificial intelligence actually Google's Gemini? And what's the significance of it? Go back and watch that episode as well. But Meta has spent years trying to position itself as a builder of core AI infrastructure, an owner of the model layer, and a company capable of competing with OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic at the frontier. But if it even has to consider licensing a rival's model to bridge a performance gap, that tells you how unforgiving this race has become and just how far they believe they are internally, right? Apple did the same thing. They had this huge, big announcement a couple of years ago about AI, meaning standing for Apple Intelligence and not artificial intelligence. And they were just going to put a ton of software resources and engineering resources to building their own stuff and embedding artificial intelligence inside of all of their products to make your phone this like super powered assistant. That didn't happen. And they did announce a really big partnership with Google's Gemini. And it also tells you that in AI, scale alone is not enough. You can spend more than almost anyone else in the world and still find yourself exposed. If the model is late, the benchmark story is messy, or if the product experience is not convincing enough. And I mean, where are we going here? Where is Facebook going? What are we doing? Reuters also notes that Meta's recent AI plans follow setbacks with Llama 4 last year, including criticism over misleading benchmark presentation for early versions. Of course, I mean, this is what everybody does when they're building software. Oh, it's going to be like this or it's going to be like that. Of course, it's going to be misleading, particularly for early versions of it. And that it abandoned release of the largest version of that model, which had been due out in the summer. So this delay on avocado, which frankly is hard to say. I mean, it's an easy word to say, but it's hard to take the word seriously in the context of building a frontier AI model. Avocado. Think about this. Some human had to approve that. Okay, this delay is not happening in a vacuum. It sits inside a bigger pattern in which Meta's AI narrative has been forceful. They've been out there talking about this a lot. But the delivery record has been uneven. And again, not that different than what's happening or what happened and what's happening at Apple. You can talk a big game, but at some point you have to execute. And so far the execution is falling behind this, like the big game talk. Okay. And this is where I think the story becomes even bigger than Meta itself. Because Meta may be showing us the next phase of the AI cycle before most people are ready to admit it. Phase 1 was like, we're really excited. We've talked about this. Here comes AI. Everyone's going to love it. Phase 2 was capital expenditure. Okay, well, now that we know that it's going to be important and it's going to be transformational, or we think it is, should we spend a ton of money on it? Right? And they've clearly agreed internally to do this. They mentioned it on their earnings call. But phase 3 may be organizational upheaval under conditions of uncertain output. And this is a much less comfortable sort of situation in which to find yourself. Because you're making this massive capital expenditure. You're falling behind on your execution. But internally, you're thinking as a company, if we can get this to work, we don't need as many people as we have because we think we can be more efficient with smaller team sizes, using more powerful tools. But these things are kind of fighting against each other, right? Because they're discussing all these layoffs, which they have not made yet. And they have not decided to do it in a way that's public. Not yet. But if they do, this is a real big dilemma. Are we going to make a bet on our own ability to execute going forward over time, building internal tools that are more powerful than just having humans doing these roles? And are we confident alone that we can do it? Or are we going to find ourselves in a situation where we don't have enough people? And now we've got to go license somebody else's AI technology and then try to integrate that into our stuff. And then when do we back that out? Right? Or are we just like wed to Gemini or somebody else's foundational frontier model? And in this case, when things like this start to happen, investors start asking whether AI returns will completely justify these infrastructure investments and commitments. Employees internally start asking whether efficiency is just, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, whether it's a euphemism for just laying people off. The engineers that are working on these tools and other tools internally start asking whether the strategy is being set by a product reality or by just some narrative that the executives want. You really, as an employee, right? As a mid-level employee, when you look up at what your seniors are telling you to do, you have to buy in. Even if you're a superstar programmer, even if you're a superstar engineer, you have to buy into the narrative. Because if you don't, you're just not going to work as hard. Because you're just doing stuff and you're thinking to yourself, this is never going to turn into anything. Why am I wasting my time? Okay. And everyone starts asking like whether the winners in AI are actually the product companies or whether the cleanest winners are still the infrastructure providers and the chip makers selling into the frenzy, right? So does NVIDIA win? Does OpenAI win? Do the people selling the cloud services win? Because they're definitely getting paid. And even if it's only like the next 3 to 5 years, they know that people are going to continue to build products and are going to need the services. Again, it just goes back to like the gold rush thing. Everybody who's looking for gold needs a shovel and a pan. And if you're in the shovel and pan business, you don't really care if anybody finds gold or you don't care who finds it because you know people are going to keep coming and looking for gold. And this is the point. And this is the way people are thinking about this in the AI space as well. We don't know who's going to win yet. You feel like OpenAI and Anthropic and Perplexity and even thinking machines are going to be around, right? The Mira Murati business, you think they're going to be around. You don't know that though, right? And this is why it's so interesting to use Meta as a proxy, as a metaphor for what's happening in the rest of the business because its ad business stays strong. I find it surprising, but it's just a fact. Meta reported 2025 revenue of $164.5 billion, up 22% year over year, and said 2026 operating income should even be bigger than that, despite the massive infrastructure step up. So it's not a distressed company, not even close. But again, you have to think about other big companies like BlackBerry, whose results were really great until they weren't, and they saw a massive drop off in spending on their core products. I'm not suggesting that people are going to stop advertising on Facebook. They clearly think their predictions for 2026 or their projections for 2026 are higher than 2025, even with the big CapEx investments that they're making, right? Facebook is I keep saying Facebook, because isn't that what you call it? It's a big, profitable company. They're choosing to absorb some extraordinary AI costs while apparently considering whether AI should allow it to run with materially fewer people. Right, so this layoff story is not about weakness. We mentioned this at the beginning. It's not about some sort of macroeconomic shift in the winds that they see. It's not the fact that their profits are not increasing at a nice level, and they're not projecting that they're going to continue to do that. This is really them considering internally, do we need to strategically redesign how we work, how we have a workforce? And again, this is not just a meta story, but it's a good proxy for what's going on in the rest of the tech industry at scale. And frankly, at the rest of the sort of institutional incumbent big company businesses at scale. Because when a profitable market leader like Facebook says, whether implicitly or explicitly, it doesn't really matter, that AI changes the staffing model, the way they're thinking about what their organizational structure is going to look like, I would say the rest of the industry needs to pay attention closely, but to me, it's like the rest of the business environment needs to pay attention really, really carefully. Because if it's happening at Facebook, there's no reason why it can't happen at every other company as well, particularly the big tech companies, yeah? Meta spent the last several years trying to recover from the reputational damage of the metaverse overreach. I mean, I've been taking the flack out of them since the moment they did it. Just those images of those little figurines, those stubby little things floating around in the metaverse just seemed so anathema to me for a company that was trying to tell you that its technology chops were so strong that they were so confident about how this was going to work, even though the demos were horrible, that they literally changed the name of their company. And again, this is why I call companies that do this and individuals that do this chasers, right? They saw another shiny new object, and that was artificial intelligence. And in a way, it became a way for them to regain some kind of seriousness in the technology world. Oh, yeah, maybe the meta thing didn't work. We don't have to talk about that anymore. We're going to quietly kind of just back off from that. But AI gave the company a more credible growth story, potentially, a more immediate monetization story, and a better alignment at the center of gravity in Silicon Valley. Everybody else was doing AI, and they were over there doing the metaverse. In a way, it made no sense. Bad strategically. But AI internally is not politically neutral. Because if workers begin to experience AI not as a tool that makes them better, but as the rationale for reducing headcount, then the cultural meaning of AI internally shifts very, very quickly. Look, I've been very clear about this. When I was at Goldman Sachs, I essentially automated myself out of a job. I knew it was happening when I was doing it. I was really good at it. And the productivity that I had went up really, really high. But the automation tools that we were building and that we were using were way ahead of their time. And we just didn't need to hire any more people to be able to do it effectively. And you can feel it when it's happening, actually. And at Meta and at Facebook, if the models that they're building do not feel decisively ahead while that's happening, people internally are just going to get skeptical because they're just going to be thinking, like, you're going to lay me off. You're asking me to build products that are going to help you lay me off. It's just really uncomfortable, this, like, what I'll call a vicious circle internally, right? And I'm supposed to believe that you know what you're doing. Again, this is from an employee perspective, because the last time we had this big shift internally, it didn't work at all. And frankly, it was kind of embarrassing. And that's why this meta story is resonating across social networks and inside the broader tech conversation. It has all the ingredients that people that instinctively understand. Massive spending. You see it internally as an employee, like, okay, I see tons of money now getting spent on that AI team. Delayed products. Okay, well, that was supposed to be out in January, but now we're saying May. Internally, people are nervous about their jobs. And you see, the other thing they see is a ton of money spending on senior people. Like, we have to hire this person away from Google, or we have to hire this person away from OpenAI. We have to grab that person from Anthropic, right? And then you hear executives kind of whispering about this idea that AI can collapse the size of teams, right? That people are going to get fired. People are going to get laid off potentially. You see all this stuff happening. Like, I just can't imagine that morale is great. Not on specific teams for sure. And again, if the world is using Meta as a mirror to itself, you have to understand or have to ask whether the AI era is beginning to reveal its first real corporate contradiction. And that contradiction is this. Companies believe, and I don't think they're wrong actually, right? Again, if you just replace AI with electricity, that electricity will unlock new growth. That's a given. Okay, this is true if you go back 100 or something years. But AI is that different. And it could be the most powerful thing that's ever been invented. It's definitely going to unlock new growth. But in practice, some of them may be using AI first just to justify internal layoffs, just austerity. Like, okay, look, maybe we have 10,000 people. We know that our compensation is tied to our stock price. If we want to make sure that our stock price stays high, particularly amid this massive CapEx spending, we're going to have to get rid of people. People internally are going to have to just be more productive. Okay. And some of these companies are saying that AI will produce competitive distance, but in practice, even these big companies are discovering that spending big does not guarantee smooth execution. And again, this is something that Dan Turnus mentioned yesterday on ATP Insights, was that something like 95% of all AI projects up until now just have not had the ROI associated with them that was expected. Listen to the whole thing. It was actually really interesting. Companies believe, or at least they're saying out loud, that AI is a productivity revolution. But remember, these revolutions are never experienced equally by management, labor, investors, and users. So what should we watch next? This is where things start to get really important. First, whether layoffs really happen or not, and at what scale. Right? Are these whispers that we're hearing, like, is this like one of these things where if there's smoke, there's fire? We'll have to see. The Reuters made clear that there's no date that's been set. Nothing's been finalized. But that uncertainty is out there. It cannot feel good inside. The other thing we have to look for is, does Avocado actually launch on the revised timeline? Do we want to put money down now and say no? And more importantly, even if it does launch, does it change the perception that Meta is chasing rather than setting the frontier? I use that word a lot, chasing. I don't like trend chasers. I like trend setters, right? You don't see OpenAI building a social network. That would be weird. So when you see a social network trying to build AI, like, it just doesn't jive with me. The third thing we have to look for is, can Meta prove to the market and to itself internally, right? Because both of these things matter, that its investment in AI and AI infrastructure are creating like real viable products and revenue leverage quickly enough to keep markets comfortable with CapEx that's just huge, just gigantic. $100 and something billion, right? So their total expenses, we said, was $162 to $169 billion. It's just so large. And finally, do the rest of the big tech companies follow the same logic? Just internally spend aggressively on artificial intelligence infrastructure, talk about having smaller teams, and quietly redefine the meaning of employment in their businesses. But you have to think about it this way, right? Think about it in another context. Did every big company start to build their own data centers? No, they went out and used the cloud. Right? Did they all try to redesign or design their own AI chips? No. They all went to NVIDIA. Okay, Apple did, but Apple has its own silicon business from the get-go. Okay, they've had it for almost a decade now, since they started producing their ARM chips and their M1 series of chips and their A chips as well for their phones. But again, they have not had a gigantic success on the other part of the artificial intelligence stack, building their own software. But building their own hardware is something that Apple's always done. Has for the most part, at least the modern Apple, has done really, really well. So the question for me here is, what is the impact of what Facebook is doing? Because if every company follows what they're doing, then it becomes sort of a template that Facebook itself is not just a company in transition. It's potentially a warning, not just for the rest of the tech industry, but for the rest of industry. Right? Because the most important story here is not that Meta may be cutting jobs. And it's not that Meta delayed a model. It's that these two things are happening in the same strategic frame. Okay? A company is betting at extreme scale on artificial intelligence outside their core competency. I just want to keep mentioning that. Extreme scale on AI infrastructure, while also signaling that AI may justify a leaner workforce, even before its next major model appears to be fully ready. And to me, like, that's the real headline. Right? Meta's basically telling us that the AI boom is no longer just a tech story. Okay? We've said this before and we'll say it again. It's about power, capital allocation, execution, and just the organizational idea about how you're going to structure your company going forward. That's the real story. Okay, I also wanted to talk about Legora coming out of Sweden. They raised $550 million at a $5.5 billion valuation. And I think the reason why I want to talk about this is because it signals a bigger shift in professional services. This is important for multiple reasons, I would say. For years, one of the kind of easiest, or I would say laziest assumptions in technology was that AI would first transform the obvious sectors: software development, customer service, search, marketing, maybe even some finance stuff, right? Because doing addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, you can teach a machine how to do that pretty quickly. But one of the most important AI breakthroughs now taking shape is happening in an industry that's way more conservative, way more expensive, and which has been far more structurally resistant to change. And that's the legal business. And that's why Europe's latest legal AI winner matters so much. Legora, as I said, raised $550 million at a $5.5 billion valuation. The reason why we're talking about this story at scale, right, is not just because they raised this money. $550 million, big raise, $5.5 billion, pretty good valuation. But we do like to talk about impact on the United States. What's happening outside that impacts what's going on inside. And again, because the U.S. is the biggest market in the world still and gives no impression that that's going to go away, Legora wants to expand into the U.S., and that's part of the reason why it raised this money, according to Reuters. So the funding story itself is big news. But we always like to talk about the second and third order stuff here. The more important signal is what Legora's chief executive officer said alongside the raise: that leading law firms and in-house legal teams in the U.S. are moving from experimentation to embedding AI across their organizations. And that's the real story. Because when legal departments, and again, it's a window into what other sort of service departments are going to think about doing when they stop treating artificial intelligence as a pilot project and start treating it as part of core workflow. Again, not sitting outside on the periphery of what they're doing, but getting embedded into every little part of their workflow that they do. Now, this is no longer a curiosity. This is about procurement. Who are they going to hire? What types of products are they going to use? And you're talking about budgeting, big budgeting, because they're going to have to do, particularly in the context of this Meta thing that we were talking about earlier in the show. There are tons of people that sit inside of these big U.S. law firms, and frankly, even the small ones, that do a bunch of analytics, that do a bunch of research, and that are part of this core operating model for these law firms. And you may actually run into the same problem. We said that Meta was a proxy for what's happening in other places in industry, not just in the tech industry. And you can see the same thing potentially happening here. We may need to lay off people inside as we're investing way more money in artificial intelligence. The budgeting here is going to matter, but so is the operating model and the organizational structure that's taking place inside these big law firms. And most importantly, you're talking about one of the clearest examples yet of AI moving from like demo into institutional adopting. And it's tempting to look at Legora and see just another startup funding headline But again, we don't see it that way. Europe does produce a ton of promising AI companies, and American investors give them money. They expand into the US, and that feels like kind of the end of the story. But this is way more important than that, way more consequential in my mind. And why is that? Well, legal services sit inside a very particular part of the economy. They're very knowledge intensive, they're highly regulated, they're reputation sensitive. So if something goes wrong, it's a problem. And they're deeply dependent on trust at some level. You have a legal problem, you want to hire a law firm that you trust, right? Any kind of legal problem, because there's no way you're going to understand the law itself on your own. It's not possible, particularly if it's sophisticated or complex. But one of the other things that Dan Turner said to me yesterday during our recording on ATP Insights was that no human should ever have to read a 500-page document again. And think about that in the context of the legal profession. If AI can gain real traction there, it's a sign that the tech is crossing a threshold, right? Not just technical credibility, but institutional credibility. Because if law firms, again, where trust is so important and reputation is really, really important, are saying, hey, there may be a way for us to embed this technology inside of the work that we do, and we trust the fact that it's going to be fine. Again, if we have the right governance in place, that could be, I don't want to say problematic, but it could be indicative of the things that are going to happen in some other industries. Reuters reported that Legora is using this funding, right, to expand into the United States, invest in talent and infrastructure, and support customers as they integrate AI into their core workflows, not just the stuff on the outside, but core. The company expects to grow to more than 300 employees across its U.S. offices by the end of 2026. And that matters, right? This idea, like I said, of core workflows, it's not the vocabulary of an experiment or a demo anymore. It's the vocabulary of serious and institutional and almost industrialized deployment inside of a law firm. Reuters coverage from Legal Week in New York reinforces the point. At that event, the legal industry's annual technology gathering, AI dominated the conversation by far. Roughly 7,000 lawyers, technologists, and executives attended. The recurring question was no longer whether firms should use AI, but how AI will reshape billing models, workload structures, client expectations. This is starting to sound very familiar. If you listen to the way I'm talking about this, it sounds very similar to what's happening inside of Meta. I said it was a proxy, and here's the perfect example of an industry that's not a tech industry, but that is going to be impacted by the infusion of artificial intelligence into their core workflows, right? And that's just really different. In the early days of generative AI, this story was a novelty. And you know for sure that law firms and other big service firms are looking at it from the outside thinking, what can it really do for me? Can it summarize a document for me? Can it draft a memo for me? Can it answer a research question for me? But once the legal team start asking, like, what happens to fee structures, margins, staffing, competitive positioning, then the market has matured and it may actually become slightly problematic, again, from an organizational standpoint. How do we organize what a law firm actually looks like? Because the way it looks today is the way it's looked for the past, I don't know, pick a number, 200 years, right? And legal AI is especially important. I actually know people working on this as well, because it's just hard to disrupt superficially. Really hard. Just think about like what a law firm does and what a lawyer does, what a legal analyst does, right? Just all the stuff that's happening inside a law firm, very hard to disrupt. In many industries, like artificial intelligence can produce impressive like looking outputs without necessarily changing the underlying business model. But in law, it's just much harder to do that. The stakes are way higher. Accuracy matters so much more, right? Trust matters more. Confidentiality matters more. You can't have stuff leaking out, right? And the work is embedded inside some very old institutional practices. Yeah, if you've ever just dealt with lawyers, you know what I'm talking about. So if legal AI is working, even if it's not 100% perfect yet, nothing ever is when it first rolls out, it suggests something way more important. That AI is becoming useful not only in open-ended creative tasks, but in tightly governed professional environments as well. And there's an economic reason why this matters too. It's not just philosophical here. The 2026 Thomson Reuters report on the U.S. legal market shows that corporate legal buyers are under serious pressure. I mean, everybody is, right? General counsel need to do more work with limited budgets. I mean, this is just the story as old as time, right? Even as the rates at top law firms keep climbing, I mean, there's inflation there as well. Thomson Reuters notes that the average AM Law 100 lawyer standard rates crossed $1,000 an hour in 2025. It's just going to put a ton of pressure on the way people buy legal services, but also how much of those legal services they actually do buy. And this is where, like, if you can kind of automate some stuff with AI, it's not even gimmicky anymore. It just becomes an economic necessity in the same way that Facebook is feeling the same pressure. If we want to make massive investments in artificial intelligence because we think this is where our business is going, but they're worried about compression as well. And I don't just mean labor compression. Everybody's worried about margin compression. But if inside of a law firm, and I'm just thinking about all the lawyers that I know as well, like what they do, they have a document, they have a sort of a drafting template document that they use, and then they just like cut and paste stuff into it. It's not the only thing that they do. Obviously, they're making very sophisticated changes to sometimes very complex documents. But on the simple side, if just like routine drafting, review, research, summarization, and compliance analysis can be accelerated safely using artificial intelligence, then just embedding it into your core workflow becomes really important because it helps clients cope with just an expensive legal system. And that is why legal AI could become one of the first really durable professional services AI markets, because there's a clear place for it. And there's a clear economic space for it as well. As things get more expensive, right? As billable hours the hour itself becomes more expensive, throw some artificial intelligence in there. Make sure that it works properly. I mean, someone's going to have to check the work still, right? Because that is going to be where the trust still plays out, right? And think about this. Like, lawyers are no more excited about disruption than any other sort of services firm, right? Probably not, actually. But the cost pressure out there is real. And like I said, Dan Turnus, this guy from Blue Prism, said to me, no human should ever have to read a 500-page document again. The workflows in the legal business are very document heavy. Tons of documentation. And is it all documentation? Sure, there's thinking and research going on as well. But if you can get some efficiency gains on the document reading, the document production, the research that goes into doing those documents, you can save a ton of money. You just can. And the most revealing detail in the Reuters Legal Week coverage may not even have been about startups. It may be about the clients. Like, one of the lawyers, according to Reuters, that were speaking at the conference, said that 2 years ago, firms were reassuring clients that they were not using generative AI on legal matters. Sure, not us. Yeah, we're not doing that. Not over here. Now, the same clients are just going in reverse, not like, please tell me you're not using it. They're saying, you're not using it. What are you doing? And this is a real turning point. When your clients come to you and say, you need to be more efficient because we don't want to pay as much money as we're paying for these services. And we know that there are tools out there that can help you be more efficient and more effective. If you're not using them, we're going to go to another law firm. Okay? Markets can change drastically when the sellers of a service get excited, but they change way faster when the buyers do. And in this case, the clients of these law firms are saying, whereas 2 years ago, according to Reuters, they were saying, please don't tell me you're using generative AI to create my documents, to please tell me you are using it, because I know it's going to make you way more effective. And that buyer shift is consistent with what Thomson Reuters' broader professional services research is showing. Okay, that in 2026, their PSR, their professional services report, says that the era of early AI adoption is past, and that organizations are now entering a more strategic phase where AI is being built directly into workflows and business planning. And this is just super important. It also notes a clear client-firm disconnect. 2/3 of corporate respondents want their outside firms to use AI. Even fewer than 20% of them formally mandate it. And that's exactly the kind of messy stage that we're in here, right, where these markets actually get built. Clients want speed, firms want to preserve quality and margins, and vendors want to become workflow infrastructure. They want to be necessary, right? They want to get embedded into your core workflows because taking them out after that is going to be hard. But everyone here is still, we talked about this, right, is still negotiating, like, what does governance look like? What does pricing look like? What does privacy look like? But the signal for this is already there. And that's why Legora's expansion into the United States matters. The US is not just a large legal market. It's the most commercially important proving ground for enterprise legal tech and, frankly, for enterprise services tech. And if Legora can win, I don't think it's so much the fact that it's just a European company, but if it can win, the significance here is not that some company is coming from Europe into the United States to do this. I mean, look at Spotify. Okay, this would not, and look at Skype, like, 25 years ago. This is not new. Okay, what it's really saying is more just about the maturity of AI infrastructure, how it's getting embedded into workflows, and how it could get embedded into the services industry in a way that may not have been expected, particularly in a one that is as conservative as the legal thing, because it's just very conservative, and we know that if they can survive this, if they can win here, that this is a big deal for what could potentially happen in other industries that are similar in a way to legal, very conservative, hard to disrupt up until now. And there had been some pushback on whether they want to actually get technologized or whether they want to actually go through the proper digital transformation. But if this succeeds, this is a large investment, we said, right, $550 million into a $5.5 billion valuation. That, to me, is the real story here. If they can come into a legal environment and say, this is actually working, and if the buyers are making the decision and are driving the way these products get built, that's a big deal. Okay, that's it today for AGTP Daily. Thank you again for joining us today. Give us a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and follow us on all of our socials, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Let us know in the comments if there's anything you would like us to discuss on our upcoming shows. My name is Michael Waits. Bye for now.